Welcome to the first workshop in the 2024 Prosecco Leadership Workshop Series. I'm Mariama Dryack-Valles, excuse me. I'm the director for the Polar Science Early Career Community Office, or Prosecco, which is a national level office that supports polar early career scientists through community building, professional development, funding, and more. Prosecco is hosted at the University of Colorado Boulder within Ceres and is supported by Instar. We have several people with us today, noting the shared backgrounds that have the Prosecco logo on them. First, we have Alexandra Padilla, or Alex, and Michaela Williams, who are with us to provide technical support. And if Alex and Michaela could give a little bit of a wave so folks can see you, that'd be great. Alex and Michaela are coming to us from Ceres Center for Education Engagement and Evaluation, or CEEE, which the former organization or group labeled Ceres Education and Outreach has just transitioned to as a name. So thanks for being with us today. And we also have two stellar facilitators with us for the day, including Tasha Snow, who's coming to us from Colorado School of Mines, and Elisa McGee from Colorado State University, and they'll be briefly introducing themselves, or they'll be introducing themselves after my little intro here soon. We want to begin the call with a land acknowledgement. Prosecco supports polar scientists in locations across the United States with research focused on both poles and in high alpine regions across the world. And we acknowledge that much of that science takes place on the unceded traditional territories and ancestral homelands of Indigenous peoples, and that some of the science done in these locations has historic roots in colonialism. With this land acknowledgement, we celebrate the many contributions of Native peoples to our understanding of the polar regions and recognize the sophisticated and intricate knowledge systems Indigenous peoples have developed in relationship to their lands. At the core of Prosecco is inclusion, and we expect that all attendees on the call today will adhere to Prosecco's community guidelines when interfacing with others on the call, which Alex is pasting a link to in the chat if you want to take a look at the community rules of agreement. And with that, I will hand it over to Tasha and Elisa, and I'll start sharing my slides here. Thanks.
Thanks, Mariama. So I'm Tasha Snow. The slide will come up in just a moment, but I'm a kind of a mix between a glaciologist and oceanographer at the Colorado School of Mines. I'm a research associate, and I do a lot of open science. And so I'll be leading a lot of the presentation today. And my background in leadership is that both in academia, in academia, I've been in charge of some academic groups, projects, and things like that. But before I was in academia, I was a naval officer in the United States Navy and was in charge of various groups of men in various situations. So I've done a lot of work and study in leadership. Elisa?
Hi, I'm Elisa McGee. I am a PhD student at Colorado State University, where I study seismology and geophysics, and I have two projects going on. One is with my advisor, where we look at the Ross Ice Shelf, where the ocean meets the ice shelf edge, the microseismicity there with ice-ocean interaction. And my second project is with Los Alamos National Lab, where we set out a distributed acoustic sensing fiber optic system recently and acquired seismoacoustic data. And I go through that and look at ambient noise sources in the data set. But most of my career before this was as an Air Force pilot and mission commander, and that involved leading teams all over the world between 6 to 60 people to really austere environments. And I've also taught as an assistant professor at Metro State University in Denver and an instructor at the Air Force Academy in the physics and geoscience departments. So most of my leadership experience is involved with those two roles. To you, Tasha.
All right, so as we get started in this leadership workshop, thinking about leadership and skills and things like that, I wanted to first start with this image. Looking at this is depicting a leader and a boss, and I wanted you to guess, just based on the images, which is which kind of to yourself. And then go ahead in the Zoom chat and share one feeling that each image evokes. Go ahead and give us your ideas on that. The above looks like slavery and the below looks like visionary. Yeah, I love that. Yeah, UG versus teamwork, force versus cooperation. Yeah, so as you continue to add those, Mariama, next slide. As many of you guessed, the boss is on top and the leader's on the bottom. So with kind of the boss slash manager sort of feel, we have someone sitting at desk, like sitting on top of the mission, potentially adding to the load, but they're kind of driving from behind, pointing forward. But you have on the bottom this leader who's, kind of leading from the front, setting the example. They're pointing forwards, their mouth is open, seems pretty empowering. So these are kind of the emotions and feelings we want to like think about as we go through the workshop today and thinking about our own leadership skills and kind of the emotions that we evoke in the choices that we make and how we interact with people. Before we get started into much, I wanted to give you kind of an illustration of the importance of leadership. So, and I'll give you kind of an anecdote, next slide, from my time in the Navy. So when I reported on board the ship, this is the U.S. Doyle. It's a frigate, FFG 39, that is decommissioned. I reported on board in 2008 when I was 22 and an officer. And when I report on board, there's 200 men, and at the head of all of this is the captain. And I'm going to anonymize the captains in these stories, so you can't look them up. But my captain, when I reported on board, was someone I really enjoyed. He was someone who is kind of known to be mild-mannered and quiet. He was someone that I rarely saw yell. So he was someone who kind of led with a carrot rather than a stick. One of the biggest criticisms against him was that he was a little overcautious. So he cared a lot about people, almost to the extreme. So when it came to running events and things like that, maneuvers that were risky with the ship, he would only let his, highest ranking officers run those. And it kind of prevented some of the lower ranked officers from getting experience in these events. And he was also super cautious when it came to things that we did in our off time. So when we'd go into port, we'd pull in, they'd have activities for us to do, and he'd be, canceling anything that had risks. So like zip lining or something like that would be taken away from us. So he was extremely cautious, and he definitely got a lot of grumbling from the crew for that. But otherwise, on board this ship, the officers worked really well together. Even if they didn't like each other, they worked really well, training each other in kind of the methods that he kind of set up in terms of, the senior officers training the younger officers. The enlisted were very respectful. The ship tended to work really well, so engines and things were constantly working, so we didn't spend a lot of time in port fixing things. And so overall, the ship worked pretty well. And then about a year and a half after I got on board, the captains changed. Next slide. And with this second captain, it takes a few months for them to kind of get oriented and for you to get a feel for, what sort of leadership they have. But after a few months, I started to see a very different sort of leadership personality. So in the few months that I had left on board, I noticed he was someone who kind of led more with the stick. He definitely yelled a lot to kind of incentivize people to do well, and was heavy-handed. He definitely threatened officers when they messed up. So a lot of the officers started to worry about their jobs and whether they were going to be kicked off the ship or not. And that's about the time that I left the ship. But I continued to talk to a lot of my friends on board, and they reported, having a lot of issues with other officers on board. People weren't working well together. There was a lot of backstabbing going on. There were issues with the subordinates, the enlisted, following rules. There were more emergencies when they went into port. So people were getting drunk and having fights. People would hurt themselves on the ship. And a lot of the equipment was failing more regularly. And so the thing to keep in mind as I kind of demonstrate both of, these captains and how the crew kind of acted under them is these are the same exact people on board this ship pretty much, but two different leadership styles. And that changed completely the environment of the ship, how people worked well or didn't work well together. And that's really the impact that leadership can have. And maybe as leaders, we might not have quite as strong of a control because we're not stuck on a 450-foot ship together. But leadership quality really impacts how happy people are, whether people work well together and whatnot, and can change the same exact people, how that dynamic works. So keeping that in mind, next slide, we're going to start talking about leadership and how to sharpen our skills. So today we'll talk about defining leadership, the importance of leadership, indicators of good leadership quality, role of emotional intelligence, and leadership styles. And then about team building, and under that, thinking about norm setting and inclusive leadership. Next slide. So with that, I wanted to start, getting your minds working about what good leadership looks like. So in the Zoom chat, go ahead and type in a reason why you think that good leadership is important in academia. Fosters collaboration, allows people to thrive and grow at every career stage. Training the next generation of researchers. It's a vulnerable time for students, not a lot of money, time, and a lot to lose. Leader can help represent them. Creates a good working environment. Yeah, so a lot of these are really awesome answers coming through. Those kind of give a great breadth of why leadership is important in academia. And so next, I'd love for you to tell me if you think that there are any differences between academia, inside academia and outside. So are there any reasons why leadership is more or less important outside of academia than within academia? Good leadership is equally important inside and outside of academia. No difference. It's more important in academia because there are less places to go for support when things go wrong. Any others? Yeah, so see. It's often seen to be less important, but it's not true. Yeah, so y'all have a very similar sentiment in this, in that it's very important in both. And it is often true that, maybe in academia, we may not have as many resources set up because we don't, as was mentioned, we may not think as much about leadership or be trained as much in leadership as people are outside of academia. So that's some really interesting thoughts about that. And I think the general sentiment is generally that it's very important, and that support and value in leadership is also very important in both and inside and outside of academia. And so in terms of the importance of leadership, I just put down three main kind of ways that leadership can be really important. And that's in, the bottom line, money, and within and outside of academia. The importance of leadership kind of falls into whether we retain people, put money into projects or people, and have that kind of go to waste or not. It's in productivity. So how many students graduate, proposals that are, funded, and success, the manuscripts that are created, the research that's quality that comes out of the work that we do, and then morale. So with that, Elisa will take you away with a little bit more about leadership.
Hey again. So it sounds like a lot of you are interested in growing, developing this leadership traits and making yourself the best you can be as a leader. So I have a feeling that you believe that leaders can be made, and that's why we're here. So I'll start off by asking everyone to think of a leader who's had a positive impact on you. Just imagine that person And maybe as we go through the slide, you can think of if that positive trait relates to any of these factors. So leaders have developed through life experiences a guiding vision. And so this isn't just like they listen to some inspirational talk and they can envision success, but that they envision throughout the process the success of the team together and individuals. They cultivate relationships with individuals so that they can envision success for each of those people. For example, I was recently doing some field work. My field partner was a research scientist, and he asked if I wanted to go to an upcoming really specialized workshop event on DAS. And I made the comment that I'm not really sure if I'm ready for that level of participation, if I know enough to really be there. And he imparted his vision of my future by just saying simply, well, by next year, by the time that event happens, you will be good enough at it. So that was really great for my confidence. And that's what I mean by a guiding vision, not just of success, but of each person. So people will rise to the level of your expectation of them. So why not envision a successful future for them and share it with them to build that confidence. The leader will have a passion for what they're doing and shares that with others. Whether this person who inspires people the most on the team is the leader or not, the person with greatest influence on the team is also a leader. What I meant to say is whether they're in that role or not, the person with the greatest influence on the team is a leader. And they can provide that hope and inspiration as well. The leader has maturity and self-knowledge. So knowing your strengths and weaknesses, as some of you said you wanted to make sure you understood, is definitely going to help you as a leader so you can make up for your weaknesses and leverage your strengths. We're curious as leaders, and we're willing to take responsibility for when things go well and when things don't. We have the courage to do what's right, even if it's not popular or results in people disliking us. And we'll get to that in the code of conduct in particular. That's what I'm getting at. So next slide, please. So how do we develop this? How do we get to that point of calling yourself a leader? It's definitely a lifelong practice. And if you take one thing away from this slide, it's that we are practicing always in this cycle of leadership development. So I'll start with the top, observe and note. And I think the strongest lessons we learn about leadership are when we're in the follower role on the team and we experience how not to lead because we feel the repercussion of these actions and that feeling stays with us. So it can be a lesson learned, and we can jot some notes down about that. We can keep a journal of notes as we go along in our career and note things that leaders do well that we want to take as a practice, and then also learn from others' mistakes of how not to lead. So taking notes from the follower's perspective is really important. Okay. Next is opportunities. So if you perhaps feel that you have not had enough experience as a leader and you want more opportunities to develop this, for example, you can step up to positions like a committee, maybe in your organization. If there's roles and you have an option of being the vice president or the treasurer, and you need practice standing up in front of people, I encourage you to take the one role maybe as the vice president. Or if you see there's a need on your team, maybe in your job as a postdoc, you see a lot of the students don't have skills in Python. You could create a one-day workshop where you get people together who have expertise in that to lead people through beginners workshops. So those are examples of how you can create opportunities to practice. And at the bottom there, it says confidence. And one thing I want to say about confidence is that imagining that many of us are new to these positions, we shouldn't expect ourselves to stand up and be perfectly assertive as a charismatic leader every day, if that's who we normally are. There are times when speaking to large groups, we need to put on a game face. And initially that might seem inauthentic, but for projecting our voice further, being more crisp and clear with our sound, and engaging others, we might have to think about it as a role initially until you gain confidence and practice, and then a lot more of your authenticity can show up. But I've definitely had days when I'm not in the mood to be as intense as is required for the mission, and I've had to put on that game face. The next thing is feedback, and I'll just go through this slide kind of quickly. But feedback, one tip that you can get to improve the amount of feedback you get is by demonstrating to your team that you show yourself constructive criticism and compassion. And an example of this is if you're out there setting up an instrument in the field and you've made a mistake, you can tell your partner, hey, don't do what I did. Make sure to turn off the instrument before you turn that knob. I should add that as a note in my checklist for next time. So you've demonstrated to your field partner that you have constructively criticized yourself, and you're going to take a note of it. And that creates an example for how they can provide feedback to you. And they feel more comfortable making mistakes in your presence as well. So something we can do is set aside time for requesting feedback. Make it a habit. Just do it at the end of every workday or every small event that you're looking for feedback on. And if you make it a practice at the end of each of those experiences, it won't feel like a dooming event where you're going to get feedback. So take notes and also laugh at yourself. And we'll move on to the next activity. So we are going to look at Miro, which is the website. You should have gotten it in a link. And if not, Alex has added the link in the chat. So we'll all go there and we'll talk about leadership traits. So thinking back to that leader I was having you imagine before that had a positive impression in your life, maybe you can think about them. And we'll add one yellow Post-it note for a strong leadership trait. You can just grab one, double click it, and add it to the whiteboard. Put a note on there about the strong leadership trait, and a destructive one in red as well. We'll take about 2 minutes to do this activity. If you have any questions about how to use this site, you can just type your question into the chat and we'll help you out.
Tasha or Lisa, can you reset that timer? Or we can just not use it for this exercise and then use it for the next one, but it's blinking on my end. Awesome.
We'll actually give it just 30 more seconds. So it got stopped. Right.
Okay, we'll finish up this Miro and go back to the PowerPoint for now. Thank you for all of your inputs. We'll look at them in just a couple minutes. In the meanwhile, I'll talk about leadership versus manager. I'm not sure if you've ever considered this, but a management position versus a leadership role are quite different. So you'll see that in common, they have to accomplish a goal in general, use resources, and explain the vision. But managers are going to get this task placed upon them and instruct to the followers, whereas leaders come alongside the team, orient themselves to the situation, and then direct the tasks. And that's based on listening to the team's needs and their goals. Managers accomplish the goals in line with the requirements made of them, while leaders believe in the work. They have a passion for the work, they express that, and they are motivated to share that with everyone. Managers and leaders both accomplish the goals, but leaders motivate a unified team to accomplish goals together. And we're going to go back to Miro now and take a look at the leader versus manager in the context of some of your inputs. So I see that leader challenges you, and I like the word you because that means the leader knows you. They have empathy, so they are relating to their team members instead of just being focused on the task. They have a long-term vision. Yep. So they're in touch with what we're doing and why, and they believe in it. And they both, as leaders and managers, have a sense of responsibility. That's true. Good communicators, yeah. That helps. Clear expectations, and we'll definitely get to that in the next couple slides. And it looks like some of the destructive traits on there I'll just mention are being aggressive, blaming, absolutely, being stubborn, condescending, I think is very common, especially in academia. All right, thank you for your inputs. We'll pause on that Miro and go back to the slides for now. So let's say you're looking from the outside in. How do you know that this team has a good leader? Well, let's consider a group you've wanted to join. Maybe you're interested in joining a lab or a team, and you go onto the department campus, you walk through the building, you enter the lab space, and imagine you've just met all of the researchers, and it was a positive impression, and it was really easy to see that. It was quick to notice, yes, this is a good team. So how was it immediately evident that this is a good ecosystem? And if you decided to join the team, how did you contribute to maintaining this culture? So it's an ecosystem and a culture, and it's immediately evident. Some of the things that you might see are people are in general happy and smiling. Maybe that's not your personality, so you're content. People on the team make eye contact easily because they're confident about what they're doing, and they're mission driven. They use positive terminology to describe the work that they're doing and their collaboration with others. So they're positively lifting each other up as well. And something I'll note is also really easy to see is that people will actively stop discussing another person without their presence to maintain trust. And if you talk about someone without them being there, and it's a situation where they should be there, then everyone on the team loses trust for that. So you'll find that this group is also productive. They're successful, and nothing brings together teams like winning. And this is what unites them, not necessarily close friendships. So although people are friendly with each other, they don't necessarily have to spend time outside of the office or the field together, but they're united by the success that they make together. So being interested in improvement, what I mean there is that you'll get a sense that if ever this team is corrected or needs correction, they're really receptive to that feedback. And that's a great sign of a good leader, because they've instilled trust in the team to continue to develop and grow. So notably, leadership, good leadership quality has these characteristics. And right now we're going to take a 4-minute break and then we'll return. Pay attention to the chat for the return time.
All right, welcome everyone back. We're gonna jump back into it. Hopefully you were able to refresh yourself. What we're going to start thinking about now is kind of leadership skills and styles and things like that, and that we can start working on in our own lives. And so to get us started, thinking about, our skills, as this slide suggests, soft skills really come into play when it comes to good leadership. Next slide. So this information is coming out of Primal Leadership, which is written by Daniel Goleman. You can see it at the bottom there. This is one way of thinking about leadership, which is through emotional intelligence. And in this book, he talks about how there are two kinds of intelligences we can use for leadership. One is cognitive and one is emotional intelligence. And so the cognitive is where you think about like IQ. And when it comes to leadership, this tends to be really high among all leaders, and there isn't a lot of variability, right? Because we've already gone through a lot of the technical aspects of our work, and that's what we've been promoted for. Emotional intelligence, on the other hand, thinks about how we emotionally understand ourselves and other people and interact with people. And this has the highest variability among leaders. And so 80 to 90% of the competencies that kind of distinguish between average and stellar leaders come from these sort of intelligences, the emotional intelligence. Next slide. So within emotional intelligence, there's personal competencies, which are self-awareness and self-management. We'll get into what those are in a moment. And there's social competencies, which are social awareness and relationship management. So for self-awareness, next slide, we tend to think about this being defined as your ability to read your own emotions and recognize their impact. It's also the ability to self-assess your strengths and your limitations, and also your self-confidence. Next slide. For self-management, this is where we tend to think about, emotional self-control, you being transparent, adaptive, having initiative and optimism. On the social competence side of things, there's social awareness, which includes empathy. It means that you have the awareness to discern the relationships and politics within your organization, and that you are able to meet the needs of those within your organization and understand those. Next slide. And then under relationship management, this is your ability to motivate through inspiration. This is you using influence to persuade, developing others through your ability to give feedback and guidance, catalyzing change, being able to manage conflict, build bonds that cultivate and maintain relationships, and your skills in teamwork and collaboration. So with each of these kind of competencies, this book kind of talks about how effective each of these are for increasing productivity and profit within an organization. So they found that in some studies that self-management competencies, so that is you being able to control your emotions, be adaptive, have initiative, those sort of competencies increase profit and productivity by 78%. Social skills, so your social awareness and relationship management, both of those kind of contributed to increasing productivity by 110%. And then the most effective was the self-awareness competencies. So you understanding yourself, your emotions, your strengths and your weaknesses, that boosted the productivity of their team by 390%. So super effective when you start to really understand yourself. So you might be wondering where the cognitive sort of intelligences fall. And obviously this does boost the profit and productivity, but it's only about 50% increase. So we really want to focus on these soft skills, understanding ourselves, understanding others and how we interact with others to really benefit our team as we go through leadership. So we'll think about a lot of those skills a little bit later and also in the next workshops. But as we build these skills, next slide, we also need to think about the kind of leadership styles that we can use to employ them. So we're going to talk about autocratic / authoritarian leadership style, democratic, and laissez-faire. And this is kind of a model that we've chosen to use. There are other models out there, other kinds of leadership styles, but for simplicity's sake, we'll use these 3 here, and you can kind of learn about others on your own if you'd like to, because it can get pretty nuanced. Next slide. So to kind of define each of these, autocratic, it means kind of the hierarchical way of thinking about leadership. So the leader provides clear expectations for what, when, and how a task should be done. They this sort of hierarchy is where a leader is kind of in command and there is control of the followers. There's a clear division between the leaders and the members, and the leader makes decisions independently with little or no input from the rest of the group. And so as you go back, as you can imagine, there are advantages and disadvantages to this leadership style. So if you could, in the Zoom chat, go ahead and add the advantages and disadvantages that you think might be associated with the autocratic leadership style. Well, yeah, a benefit can be that it's pretty organized, but it doesn't really enhance the teamwork side of things. There's a clear idea of what has to be done. It can be efficient. Progress will move on more quickly. Disadvantages are that you lose out on the benefit of alternative perspectives. Awesome. These are absolutely perfect. Next slide. So yeah, as many of you mentioned, the clear set of expectations is helpful. It increases how quickly you can decide and implement decisions. Because you don't have to delegate, it cuts down on confusion when directives are going through multiple layers of management. And it can also mean that your team is better trained and more productive because they're able to be supervised directly. Next slide. The disadvantages, as many of you mentioned, you only have your own experiences and ideas to draw from. You get only the creative input from one person, and the team can potentially have feelings of resentment because they are unrecognized or unheard. You're more likely to micromanage in this leadership style, and it can cause a hostile or low morale working environment. And so it's important to think about these as you use the autocratic leadership style. The next leadership style, next slide, is the democratic one. And this is one, as you can imagine, where all of the members kind of make decisions together. So every member shares in the freedoms and responsibilities of leadership, and the leadership mainly acts as the spokesperson or facilitator to ensure that the decisions reached by the team are carried out. It tends to encourage free exchange of ideas throughout the group. All members have equally valued voices, and you do have to rely on group participation, but it also puts a high value in the expertise each member brings to the table. So as we did before, could you put in the chat ideas of advantages and disadvantages you can think for the democratic leadership style? Yeah, collaboration. Potentially it's less decisive and efficient. You get lots of ideas, but potentially you might not have forward movement. You get to put forward a diversity of ideas, yeah. And disagreements might be more likely. Feels inclusive. Yeah, cool. Great. These are all perfect. Next slide. Yeah, as many of you mentioned, the advantages for democratic are that you get to, harness the creativity of the entire group. Difficult issues can be worked out because you can get better solutions from everyone working on it. There's reduced internal communication gaps that often develop between employees and management. So you don't get that large gap between a leader and subordinates. The team unity can generally grow, and it improves the work environment and reduces employee turnover generally. The problems with it, though, is that the time to deliberate is a luxury. When decisions need to be made quickly, especially during deadlines or emergencies, subordinates may not be able to adapt to the stress that they get under in these situations. It also can lead to responsibilities being unclear, and it's harder to identify members who aren't fulfilling their own responsibilities. So the last leadership style is laissez-faire. And in the laissez-faire leadership style, it's hands-off, directions only given upon request. You assign a task to employees, and then after you've assigned them and given them the necessary resources, you aren't involved anymore. The employee decides the best approach to fulfill those. It puts trust in subordinates to stay self-motivated, and each team member succeeds or fails on their own abilities. So for this, we're going to skip, just for time, talking about the advantages and disadvantages in the Zoom link, but I'm sure many of you would have come up with these answers. For the advantages for laissez-faire are that team members operate completely free from unnecessary restrictions, and so there's a lot less overhead. You streamline the overall work process. It helps promote employee morale, and it gives skilled and self-motivated employees a chance to reach their fullest potential. So this is something that's really beneficial if you have experts. And next slide. The disadvantages are that a team can quickly drop in productivity if they don't have a firm hand, and that deadlines may not be reached, crucial steps may be skipped, or quality of work may suffer from a lack of guidance, and especially if those team members don't know to act or ask for guidance. So as you can imagine, with these advantages and disadvantages, there are scenarios that might be better for one leadership style or another. And the thing to keep in mind, as many of you mentioned at the very beginning, is we all have different leadership styles that we might excel at or be much stronger at. All of these you can use fluidly, right? You can move depending on the scenario from one to the next, or from each person that you're working with to another. So you can kind of tailor this to your own situation and your own leadership styles. So why not, in the Zoom, go ahead and write out certain scenarios that you think might be advantageous for an autocratic leadership style. You can also do the democratic and laissez-faire. And you can do them in any order that you like. Right, autocratic, great for emergency operations, when quick action is needed. Democratic is good when you have a win-win situation that you'd like to have come out of the problem that you're tackling. Democratic is good where creativity will be really useful. How about laissez-faire? Laissez-faire is could be useful when people have independent projects, one-on-one mentoring, when there's a lot of time, when there's room for exploration. Cool. Yeah, these are awesome. Next, so for autocratic, as many of you said, when times get tough. Another one that I didn't read through everything, but when team correction is necessary, it's also really important. When you're, upholding the code of conduct or something, you could find the autocratic useful. Next slide. For the democratic, day-to-day work could be really useful when you have that luxury of time. When you want to give your team the feeling of ownership over, the work that they do, their successes and failure. And then laissez-faire is really useful when team members show the necessary drive, when they have the necessary training to do what they are supposed to do without supervision. And when you have the ability to rely upon, the expertise of every member of the team. And so actually in one of these workshops that I gave before, some people brought up, potentially as a leader, when you start out with a new team and people have less experience, you might lean more towards the autocratic side. And then as they gain expertise and experience, you might start to use democratic and potentially more laissez-faire as they become experts. So that's one example of how you might move through this. You can also do it just in the same exact scenario or in like one meeting, you can move through these. So keep that kind of flexibility in mind as you think about these styles and how you would employ them. So with that, we are going to do another exercise. So let's move again to the Miro board. And for this one, I'm gonna rope you all into where I'm at. You've been brought to me. For this exercise, we're gonna think about your personality traits as a leader and how they can be beneficial for a team and whatnot. So for this, we're going to identify personality traits for leadership that can benefit a team and then identify the opposite. So these shifted around, but I've given examples here. We have opposing sort of personality traits. Someone could be big picture, or they could be really detail oriented, or potentially someone is extroverted or very introverted. And in a moment, we'll take some of these and think about where we are along the spectrum of these and where everyone else is along the spectrum for some of these. Cool, we've got some good ones on here. Models work-life balance, overworker, planner, last-minute decision maker, good with the connections, creates internal competition between teams, structured or out-of-the-box thinker, right, we have 30 more seconds. Nice work, everyone. Open-minded and flexible, decisive and steadfast. Encouraging or discouraging. Personable, limited social battery. Cool. All right, so with these, we're going to move to the next group below, where we're going to think about where we are along the spectrum here. And as we do that, if you could pull out your Strength Finder exam if you took it, or any the other Strength Finder tests that you took, because we're going to think talk about that in the next exercise. So get that out while we're talking. Basically in the next oh my gosh, I was dragging everyone around, wasn't I? I'm so sorry.
You're
So,
good. You're good in
okay.
terms of the screen share anyway.
I need to stop making people follow me now that I got you to where I want you. So for this one, I want you to use these dots to show where along the spectrum you are with each of these. So we're going to start out with big picture versus detail oriented. You can put your dots there where you are between big picture and detail oriented along the spectrum, and then move to the three below that and go ahead and place on a dot anywhere within that section where you are, and choose your favorite color. So we'll give you 2 minutes to do that. All right, it looks like we have everyone kind of done now, so we'll stop the timer and go through these a little bit. So as we think about the spectrum of these traits that we have, sometimes we can think about, one trait being better than another. But I think it's really important to recognize that there's a time and a place for most of the traits that we excel at, whether it's one thing or another. It's important to recognize that there's certainly places where you can excel in one than another. And Elisa had a really good example of this. Do you want to share that?
Oh, sure. An example of big picture versus detail oriented. I think each of these actually just, in my mind, I can think of a situation where I act as big picture and another situation where I'm detail oriented. It just depends on the situation, right? Another example is down at the bottom.
Well, I remember the story you told me about organization.
Oh, sure. Yeah. If for the most part, I'm really organized, and people see that as go to Elisa about organization and give her the task of organizing this as a strategic thinker. And sometimes I can get a little bit too detail oriented, and that can be a negative versus a strength, because I can get, if there's something that needs to get done really quickly in the organization, it might not be me to do it, but others who are less strategic and organized might be of the mindset of, oh, last minute task, I can get on that. So it just depends on the person and the situation.
Yeah. So that's like an excellent example. We often think of organization as being really beneficial, but in some cases it can burden us. And so think about that as we think about our own traits and other people's traits, and having, kind of grace for and open-mindedness around some of these traits. So we'll start with looking at these traits along the spectrum, and maybe notice where people as a whole in our group may shift to one side or the other. So big picture and detail oriented people look like they're pretty spread across the middle there. Some people are really far to one side or the other, but we have a good clustering kind of across. And planner versus last minute decision maker, it looks like among our scientific group, we were probably a little bit more planners. When it comes to independent worker and being team oriented, this is, I think, common in science, but a lot of us love to work independently, right? Science kind of makes it easy to do that, and we don't get to work as a team as often. So it makes sense that a lot of us are more oriented towards independent working. And then structured versus out of the box thinkers, a lot of us look like we're more, out of the box thinkers. And that is probably something that helps with creativity. When you think about all of these, though, as a team, often it's really important to have both ends of the spectrum to kind of execute things effectively and to address most problems. So it's really nice when we think about our traits. We'll think about this a little bit later too, but to think about the traits that complement us and who around us might complement those skills. So next we're gonna move down to the Strength Finder test responses. So get those out, look at your top strength. And as you look at this board, we have different colors here. These are the different groupings of the Strength Finder test. So depending on what you had as your number one quality, look for that under the influencing group, under strategic thinking, under relationship building, or under achieving. And go ahead and grab the sticky note color at the bottom of the page there for the one that matches your strength. And don't worry if you took something other than Strength Finder for this test. You can find what you think is your top ability or the top ability that came up in that test, and find what's closest out of these lists. So you can self-perceive, or if you didn't, you actually take a test. But go ahead and grab a sticky note, and we'll see how these fall out. All right. Time's up. So one thing to keep in mind as we look at our strengths on here is the Strength Finder and these tests are meant to show us our strengths, right? You notice that they don't tell us like what our weaknesses are. And this is because the Strengths Finder is meant to find things that both you're naturally talented at and you're interested in. And that means that even if you have weaknesses in other areas, you can use these strengths to compensate and achieve those things. So for instance, if you were low on communication, but good in one of the relationship building ones, so potentially harmony. If you want harmony, you might really focus on doing a good job with communication because that will create harmony. So this is really just kind of focusing on how you get things done, how you achieve, how you relationship build, and do your strategic thinking and influencing. And so what's really interesting, and I think is pretty common, is that we have a few colors that are a little more prominent than others. So actually, I was expecting to see a little bit more blue. You'll notice there's a ton of learners in this group, which I think is common because we're all scientists. Another one in here that's almost equally prominent is relationship building. So a lot of us are good at building relationships. And then, which achieving is actually something I might expect a little bit more, the green ones, but certainly it makes sense. Influencing is not something we need in science. So it's pretty common for us not to have those strengths in science. So those who do are probably a little bit more inclined or interested in some of the leadership pieces in their work naturally. So yeah, so as we think about these kind of strengths and go forward, as I mentioned, let's switch back to the PowerPoint. Make sure that you consider, again, how you might build a team that complements your strengths and weaknesses. So we're going to think about how to build a team next. But keep these things in mind, your personality traits, who in your team complements you well, and how you would build a team as a leader. So with that, Elise is going to take it away.
Hey, thanks, Tasha. I really like looking at that slide, and I hope we can look at it again. I am definitely the learner academic, so I fit right perfectly in the academic world for now. And like she said, we're going to think about how to build a team. So let's say you're brand new to a leadership role, and this is day one. Next slide. So your first impression sets the tone. People will look at you and make nonverbal associations with why you were chosen for this role, and they're already going to have maybe a backstory about why you were selected. So you're there to listen initially, and as they say, listen twice as much as you speak. And when you introduce yourself to the team, take the time to truly hear your teammates, and that will help you gain insight into how things are currently going if you're taking command of a team that already exists, and if things need to go better or what is going well. So this makes everyone in the team feel valued and opens up communication. Let them know what truly drives you to be in this position. So it's probably not power, it's probably something authentic. Let them know your personal story about how you got involved in this work and why you're committed to it. A strong sense of purpose should be instilled in why you're there and why the team is there. And actually, I think as a PhD student, I'm hyper focused on this very specific task. And that is true for many researchers I know as well. And maybe we can all get a little bit too focused as specialists, and having a leader who can be attuned to outside of the team our greater impact on how our work impacts society or is meaningful in the long term should be your role as a leader to integrate that specialized work into the real purpose that we're making in the world. So if you can connect this team's mission to impact, that will give the team something to rally around, and people do want to rally around something. From my experience, if people don't have something positive to rally around, they'll find something negative too. So that can be a really great thing as a leader, is to find some common ground that we can all rally around. Next slide. Setting expectations. Definitely day one. The objectives and your mission should be at the heart of your expectations. We're therefore to accomplish the fieldwork and the mission. And these should be explicitly stated together in a group so that everyone hears and acknowledges that we're all on the same page, but also followed up by written form, because not everyone is able to recall. And especially if you have this written down, it will reinforce it if you ever have to recall those expectations later. So each person on the team should have a role, and that ideally, right, would match your abilities and talents as a teammate. And we can delegate these roles as a democratic process or dictated by leadership. Either way, all members of the team should know the role of each other, and that sets clear expectations on the team also. And it improves recognition of the value of each of our teammates, so that especially if one person is out of the office or unable to fulfill that role, everyone knows as a collective what needs to be done to make up for that. And additionally, if people know, as I said, I'm the strategic person, maybe they might feel more comfortable coming to me, valuing my experience and saying, I'm going to ask Elisa for some help on how to strategize and organize this plan. So it brings value to each teammate and helps the collective just function without a lot of dictation. Next slide. Consider a code of conduct. This can be an outline for your expectations of behavior of the team, agreements of how we're all going to conduct ourselves, and consequences if not upheld. There are a couple of resources that are at the end of the slide and will also be shared by Alex in the chat. And these are samples of codes of conduct. One is from the Association of Polar Early Career Scientists, APEX, and they have a sample code of conduct and a Bill of Rights on their website that can be modified for your work, for field work in particular. And additionally, the second resource is Safety and Belonging in the Field Checklist by Sarah Green and others, which integrates the code of conduct with a checklist if you are the organized type. Alex will share these links. Thank you so much. And I want to mention at Colorado State University in the geoscience department that I'm a part of, there has been an initiative, a working document of a code of conduct that graduate students can use if they go into the field, that is developed by grad students and undergrads as a conversation. And so there's buy-in from a majority of students about code of conduct. And it's really empowering, and it helps new leaders, if there's a new TA or a new postdoc, to know what our culture is about and what we all believe. And most importantly, people will maintain this code of conduct if they publicly have agreed to do so. So the incentive to not be a hypocrite is there, and that will keep people aligned with it as far as their behavior. And particularly, it's successful if the group had a say in creating the document. So if possible, do that together. Next slide. So once we have a code of conduct, it's only as good as it is enforced. Your teammates will be watching for how you handle poor behavior, and this can either reduce trust or reinforce it with the team if you uphold these standards. If you're made fully aware of a problem, for example, on the team, but you don't show that you've addressed the problem fairly, instability and insecurity in the team can happen. And this is when people will start talking about the situation because word gets around, right? And then they'll start to unify over a narrative. So in the absence of the enforcement of it, we can get into all kinds of trouble on the team. And this is your opportunity to demonstrate your word and your character by following the code of conduct and addressing it. And that's when I mentioned earlier about not being liked. Of course, we generally want to get along with each other as a team, but following your word and the code of conduct might lead you to not be liked by a lot of people. Let's see. So enforcing, it requires engagement with the problem. We have to engage, number one. And this requires confrontation with all parties involved. If you're not naturally inclined to confrontation, that's okay. You can practice it in your daily life. Practice your approach, how you're going to approach the people, summoning the courage to engage, the wording that you use in different situations with different personalities. And this will build your confidence. So I want to give you one example of the classroom. I think a lot of us have instructed before, and this is a leadership role. You are guiding a group of undergrads or graduate students through a 1 hour experience, most likely. And we all know of that person in the back room who sits back and critiques the instructor, maybe makes smirky comments. I've definitely had those. So the body of the classroom is probably annoyed with this person and is distracted. And they're looking at me as the leader in the front saying to themselves, is she going to do anything about this? And maybe that resonates with you. Did you ignore the problem? Did you address it? How did you engage with them? And I think the key here for inclusivity is consistency, how we handle not just the bad apple in the room, but anybody who has a negative behavior that we all agreed we would not demonstrate in the classroom. So that's an example of how you can practice it every day. Just take the opportunity to really engage, follow through, and have consistency, and you'll develop that confidence to engage. Next slide. This is an intimidating slide. There's a lot on here, but focus right on the middle for now and think about a stressful situation where you've had to engage before. You might have like a tight stomach, and think about how you felt. You might be breathing rapidly. To engage is our goal. Our goal is not to withdraw, ignore, or dominate. So focus on the emotions part of our goal, which is to engage. So we want to come from a place of courage, respect, and love for everybody there, confidence, and humility. So before you approach the problem, to just take a deep breath and assess yourself. How do you feel? If you're fearful, angry, distrustful, maybe you're ashamed of someone's behavior or guilty for not correcting that a couple of days ago, you feel guilt, you'll probably withdraw or dominate instead of engaging. If this is the case, there's a couple of options. Some ideas I have for you. Number one, delay if possible, until you can express those emotions where you're able to engage. Two, seek confidants to work through the situation if you do have that time. And if they're outside of the team, ideally, to just work through the scenario with and get a level head about it. And three, writing things down so that you can see more clearly the facts from your opinions of the situation. And we'll talk more about conflict resolution in March. So this is just an opening to that, to assess yourself and think about how to engage, not withdraw or dominate. Next slide. We should be experts at biases. We, as science-minded folks, we are aware of the scientific process. So if there's a problem, we should be able to know how what our biases are in theory, and how to approach a problem so that we make sure we're looking at all the facts of the situation. So this takes a lot of practice, and of course we're not experts at this, but we can leverage those skills that we have in science to work through a problem. The picture here is of both people being right. One person sees a 6, the other sees a 9. Can you, from a leadership perspective, see the view of both of these people and work toward a win-win solution, be win-win minded? And like I said, we'll talk about conflict resolution in March. Next slide, please. Engaging from the start. So again, imagining that you're brand new to the job, and how are you going to get people to feel confident talking to you and communicating with you? I usually have my hair up at my military job, and I can be pretty stoic. I have a dry sense of humor. But today I'm a little bit more approachable and looking casual, but everyone's going to have this concept of you based on the way you look or the way you act about whether or not they're comfortable talking to you, and that's not your fault. So what can you do about that? You can keep communication going before any problems arise. So people feel comfortable coming to you by setting office hours and telling them how to communicate with you, different phone numbers or email, the setting boundaries on the times for that is appropriate too. An open door policy works for some people. If you have one, stick to it just with consistency so people do trust that you adhere to those hours. My advisor has a cracked door policy just for noise control. If it's cracked, then come on in or knock. And I like to set up hours where my door is closed just because I need to get focused work done. But I post that on the front of my office so everybody knows. What I like to do as a new leader is set up individual meetings with each teammate. If this is practical for your small team, I definitely advise it. That way you get to know each person, their goals, and make sure they understand their role. And this will also give you time to express to them that you are committed to giving them feedback in a timely manner, in a constructive way, and that you're open to ideas for improvement. So just share your personal policy with them at that time in a really welcoming way. Next is just normalize everything. Schedule regular meetings with this person. Maybe it's not in your office, maybe it's somewhere they feel a little bit more comfortable, like at a coffee shop or something like that. But if you have a regular meeting scheduled, in the event that something does come up, they won't have to feel this sense of, oh no, now I have to like collect my thoughts and email or schedule a new meeting with this person. It will already exist so that they can engage with you and hopefully have that become more comfortable over time. So the final note is setting the example for open expression. In team meetings, if you disagree, which I'm sure we've all been a part of a disagreement in assessment of our work, as a leader of the team, you can demonstrate how to disagree. You'll come up with some words that are approachable and you can practice them like, oh, wait there, I disagree with that. Here's why. And what do you all think? So practice the phrasing and the terminology, let everyone else speak their impression of it and not have an emotional response. And that demonstrates to the team that it's a safe environment to disagree. So that can actually aid in early conversations because they know that you're fair and approachable. Next slide. All right, so Tasha will show us how to actively foster this environment where team members feel valued and respected, regardless of their background. Thanks, Tasha.
Yeah, so as we think about inclusivity and equity and bringing that to our team, what we mean is that we want to actively foster an environment where all team members feel valued, respected, and supported, and that's regardless of their background, perspective, and experiences. And the reason why that is important is A, it fosters a culture of belonging. B, it creates the ability for everyone to thrive and reach their full potential. And as you allow each individual member to benefit from this, to thrive, you will also be benefiting the team because each of its pieces is working much better. So that's kind of what inclusivity and equity brings to the table and why we want to have it within our group, especially in terms of bringing, full ideas to answering solutions. Next slide. So the way that we can do that and bring that about in our team is to make sure that we recognize and mitigate biases. So there's personal and organizational biases that we can think about, and we want to consider the effect of these biases that it may have on decision-making and interactions. And as we think about these kind of biases, what's important to note here is addressing personal biases is very important, right? But in terms of addressing personal biases, the organizational ones actually drive how people respond a lot more than each individual's personal biases. So it's really important to address the organizational ones in order to foster each person abiding, like understanding and minimizing their biases. So with that, the structural changes and policy making changes or policy changes might be most important to integrate. So after we do the training and make sure that everybody personally values these things, we want to change policy to do things like anonymize paperwork when we're hiring or reviewing for promotion. So this is one way we can structurally change and make sure that people don't know gender, culture, race from the decision-making process. And another way that we can minimize biases is to make team decisions rather than do just one person making decisions, because then you start to be able to counteract each person's biases. Next. You also will want to provide flexibility around individuals and team needs. So understanding and appreciating differences is really important. And those are culturally, so you want to learn about cultures of the people on your team. You want to understand perspectives and show genuine interest in each person's perspectives, no matter how different, whether you disagree or not, you can value that. You want to value people's experiences and also their needs. So to value people's needs on your team, you can think about what sort of special scenarios or life choices or lifestyles people might have. Create work and evaluation plans for the team and individuals like uniquely, and consider diversity of minds and life schedules. So what I mean by some of this is like, say you have a parent who's on your team and you need to have a team meeting. It would be really bad for morale for that person for you to hold a team meeting at 3 o'clock every day when they need to go pick up their child. Or perhaps you have people across time zones and you are on Eastern time zone and you want to hold a meeting at 8 a.m. Eastern time. So you're basically going to make it so that someone on the West Coast might not be able to join, or potentially only people who do not have children or something like that might need to do that. There's also different kinds of holidays and religions and lots of different things you can take into account, but really valuing every person's differences and providing space for there to be flexibility in your plans and evaluations and schedules. Next slide. So that we also want to create a diverse and welcoming environment. So we've already talked about active listening. We want to highlight underrepresented voices in our meetings. So potentially, talking about papers and highlighting, that this is coming from a different, a different country or, a different kind of voice than we're used to, and really raising that up. We can create a safe space for giving and receiving feedback, as we've already talked about, articulating a code of conduct and providing accountability. And the accountability, again, is key. Checking in frequently and asking for feedback, celebrating diversity of thought, and focusing on building team trust to break down barriers, right? As you have more trust with the people in your group, they're going to be more excited to contribute, feel more empowered, and to let you know when things are going wrong. So with that, we're kind of reaching the end, and I wanted to leave you with a few practical skills for leadership as you go forward just beyond this first workshop. Next slide. So I'm going to give you a few leadership tips that we're going to go through really quickly. As I mentioned before, knowing your people, so their names and information about them, can be really beneficial for building rapport and trust with your team. And, when you walk up in the morning and greet somebody and you say, instead of saying, hey, or how's it going, you say, hey, Elisa, it's great to see you. How are you doing? Just using eye contact and their names and letting them know you know them, and it kind of builds rapport. And if you have problems doing some of that, memorizing things, especially at first, definitely check out Moonwalking with Einstein. That can give you ideas. There's different tactics for being able to remember some of these things. For instance, when I learn a new person's name, I think of another person that I know that has a similar name or a word that's very similar, and building that memory connection helps me to purposefully remember people's names. Next slide. Another great leadership tip is to surround yourself with the right teammates. So again, think about complementary skills to your own and to within the team that you build. And it's always awesome to have more experienced and knowledgeable people around you. So having a team that actually knows more than you about a lot of things can be really cool. You can get more to the laissez-faire leadership style and do some cool things with that team. Next slide. Another important thing is to set the example. So I would highly recommend to never ask people in your team to do things that you would not be willing to do yourself. And in the military, this came up a lot. It's a little bit different in academia. It's a different sort of thing. But like in the Navy on a ship, my guys would need to, clean our space, and officers were not expected or allowed technically to do that. And just getting in the dirt and doing it with them just once built so much rapport and respect and trust within our team. So really getting down in the dirt can be helpful. Next. Another one that's really important is praise in public and criticize in private. And obviously there are like specific instances where you don't want to do this. Say someone in the team calls you out and says something that is rude or breaks the code of conduct in front of the team that puts someone else's safety at risk. You would want to address that publicly as tactfully and fairly as possible. But in most circumstances, if someone messes up, you want to criticize them in private and overly praise in public. So you want to be quick to praise and slow to admonish. Next. And the last one that I'm going to share with you is to remember that you work for them. So a leader is there to facilitate the success of those below them, to facilitate the success of the team. And so by making sure you get people what they need and the input that they need to be successful in what their goals are, the more successful you will be as a leader. So with that, just as a recap, next slide, we went through defining leadership, which included the importance of leadership, indicators, emotional intelligence and leadership styles, and we talked about team building. So within that, norm setting and inclusive leadership. Next slide. So to kind of wrap up, what we wanted to do is get a little feedback from you. As we think about those things through our journey today and what we learned, it'd be awesome if you could share what content today resonated most with you in the Zoom chat. Different leadership styles and when to use them was really helpful. Active listening. Oh yeah, the sliding scale on strengths. Self-awareness can boost productivity. Yeah, knowing that we are somewhere on the spectrum of diverse skills, and understanding like how that can play with other people. Yeah, understanding yourself. Cool. Awesome. It was great having this workshop with you. Thank you so much for all of your input. We have some resources in this slide deck that you can access. There's some books and things like that, URLs to access things if you want to continue thinking about your leadership styles. So I've mentioned a few things there for practicing and learning about those. And yeah, from there, I'm going to turn it over to Mariama to close up.
Awesome. Thank you, everybody. And I just flashed those resource slides for you all, but you will receive the slides / can access the slides in various ways that we'll give you access to afterwards. And I'm going to wrap up, but I see we have a question here before doing so. Go ahead.
Yeah, this is a Zhong Huan. I just wondering if you have, this is a very useful resource for building the pipeline. Do you think you have a website or altogether a package that we can add on to the report? Or do you even willing to join us to write the report on how to build a pipeline for polar research community? Because we notice nowadays there are not so many young scientists or PhD students they are willing to get into this field?
That's a good question. So the resources will, from all of the workshops, will be posted on the Paseco website afterwards. And we can certainly follow up directly via email as well for further conversation. You can reach out to us at paseco@colorado.edu, which Alex can post a link to in the chat. But that kind of is a good segue to what I was going to share, which is that the resources I'm referring to are that the recorded versions of the talks or of the workshops, and also all of the links and resources that have been referenced will be shared in a follow-up email, and then will be publicly accessible on the Paseco website. So please stay tuned for that information. And thank you so much to the workshop organizers, Tasha and Elisa, for making the first of the 3 leadership workshop series events happen today, and for everybody's flexibility in the date change for this first workshop. Thank you all on the call for participating so actively. I think workshops are most exciting when everybody engages and shows up in the chat, is willing to unmute and share thoughts. And I found it personally really great to understand where everyone's coming to this space from in terms of wanting to engage with leadership as a topic. So we hope you found the event useful, and we encourage you to attend the rest of the Leadership Workshop Series events. The 2 dates for them are posted on the screen here. And again, we can divert you towards that via email as well. And as always, you can see upcoming events on the Paseco website, which is paseco.org. And be the first to know about any of the workshops or panel discussions we put on via our monthly newsletter. Alex is posting some links in the chat, including access to subscribing to the Paseco newsletter, and also a link to encourage you all to give us post-event feedback so that we can continue improving this workshop series, but then future Paseco events into the future. So please, if you can, take 3 minutes to fill that out. It's a really short survey and helps us make the content in all of the Paseco events most relevant to you all. And I guess finally, thanks for engaging. I guess looking forward really briefly at what to expect is this second Leadership Workshop Series event is called the Leadership Toolbox, Team Building and Navigating Conflict, which Elisa and Tasha have alluded to at various points throughout the workshop. And for that event, we'll be hearing from 4 external panelists, and then also having a short, like more interactive style event. And then that 3rd workshop in the series is Leadership from Above and Below, Building Safe and Constructive Work Atmospheres. So thanks again, and we look forward to seeing you at upcoming events. Have a really good day.
Thank you, everybody.